question to you is, who does a Miami fan hate worse? OSU, Ohio State, or Notre Dame? Say you.
For the modern day fan, it would be Ohio State.
Okay.
For a long-standing Miami Hurricane fan like you or I, it would be Notre Dame because, you know, in the 70s and early 80s, they were the dominant team, one of the dominant teams, them in Oklahoma and Nebraska, Pitt.
Yeah.
And they used to really beat up on people.
Yeah.
And Miami was one of the teams that used to get beat up on. And then when it got flipped around in the 80s and the 88 game, that Convicts versus Catholics game, that really just burned a lot of us as fans because Cleveland Gary did not fumble that ball. Ground
right.
That was a touchdown. And like Jimmy said, if you lead the game in the ref's hands, you're going to walk away with an L. So I felt like that 88 year, Miami got robbed in that game up there in South Bend. So I never really cared for Notre Dame. I'm not going to say I hate Notre Dame. I just never liked Notre Dame. You know, after that, just never liked them. Ohio State, I've never cared for Ohio State. And the 2003 Fiesta Bowl just really was the cherry on top. I hope this national championship game ends in a tie. I would love to see that. I know it's not going to happen.
Right.
I would love to see that happen. I'm not an Ohio State fan. I never will be an Ohio State fan. Never. After what happened in 2003, never again. Never.
So what is your most memorable game that the U.S. played? That you was like, man, that game there, hey, that's the best game ever.
I would have to say the 2000 game against Florida State down there in the Orange Bowl in the heat. You know, they were ranked number one. They were coming off. Florida State had a really good team when they had Chris Winkie at quarterback. They had a lot of good players. They had a really good defense. Antrell Roll was on that team. They had a really good team. And for them to win that game and them to miss that field goal, that was really what turned it around. That was a very, very memorable game. There were some other games in the 80s and 90s, but that game right there is what really turned it around after all the turmoil after Dennis Erickson with the sanctions and whatnot in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. That game stood out. Another game that stands out was the one they lost to Alabama. You know, that hurt.
Yeah.
Lamar Thomas getting caught from behind and getting stripped like that changed that game. You know, Alabama fans hang on that game like we beat you. And I'm like, well, don't forget the 1990 USF&G Sugar Bowl. Miami kicked Alabama's butt and won that national title. So I tell Alabama fans, don't get too carried away always about that 93 game.
Right.
So, but that 2000 game against Florida State down there at high noon, that was a big ball game. And back then, you know, there was no night games on Saturday. Your big games were at noon.
Yeah.
During the day, those were your big ball games before the cable sports network threw their poison into it. So that game really stands out to me. That one right there in particular.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the transition from Manny Diaz to Mario Cristobal and some of the stuff that he has to go through to build the program back up to get where he wants it to be at. Looks like to me he's on the right track. But let's talk about that transition period from when Manny left to when Mario took over.
They were two different type of coaches. I'm not saying Manny Diaz is a bad coach. He's not. They got different type of players. I believe Mario came in and he had to emphasize on you can't win a game if you don't have an offensive line. You know that from your days playing.
Yeah.
If you don't have a line, you can't protect your quarterback and you can't run the ball.
Correct.
And if you have a solid people up in the trenches, I like what Nick Saban said this year about the team. He noticed with Miami that they have an SEC style offensive line now. They got some real big guys. They got one of the better O-lines in the country. And that leads to why. That's one of the reasons why I think Carson Beck came over.
Okay.
A lot of the Manny Diaz guys were not. There were some athletes on that team, but a lot of them transferred when Mario came in because he was not a disciplinarian with things. A lot of things flew on that team that didn't fly with Mario.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why you had a lot of guys transfer once Cristobal became the coach.
Okay.
He didn't come in with the verbiage like, say, a Dion did when he got to Colorado. The
Right.
situations were similar, but not the same. Colorado was in a worse condition, but he knew coming in, guys were going to have to go. They weren't his type of guys.
Okay.
And he knew he was going to build that team around the trenches. You can have all the athletes you want on the outside, but if you don't have a line that can block for your quarterback and make holes for your running backs, you're not going to get very far.
Okay.
So that's the difference, and it's paid off. You go from 5-7 to 7-5 to 10-2. If you would have asked me 6 months ago, would you be happy with a 10-2 record? I would have said, yeah, that's an improvement. So to catch the flack they caught because they lost to Georgia Tech and Syracuse, okay, it happens. The defense wasn't there. The defense just wasn't there.
Yeah.
So now he's addressing that. So we got some. He addressed that. So I think we'll see some changes with the next season coming up.
Okay. So what's